You're a qualified counsellor and you feel ready to take that next step. Counselling Tutor's Advanced Certificate in Clinical Supervision, including online and telephone working. Built for the busy counsellor, the course starts with self-directed learning inside the custom-built learning portal. The theory then comes to life in live tutor-led sessions where it's demonstrated and explained. And you get to practice it yourself with peers with observation and feedback from the tutors. This training is mapped to the BACP Supervision Competence Framework and is NCPS quality checked. Visit counsellingtutor.com, click on the Products tab, and select Clinical Supervision Training to download your information pack and course handbook.
Hello and welcome to episode 375 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and today I'm joined by Dara McLaughlin from our sponsor Web Healer. Dara is passionate about solving problems of all kinds, whether they're technical or non-technical, large or small. He's also no stranger to determination and resilience, having completed a remarkable 4,800 kilometre rowing journey across the Atlantic Ocean in fewer than 40 days, winning the solo class in the 2026 World's Toughest Row before arriving safely in Antigua, and thankfully he joins us today safely back on dry land because he's going to talk about sharing his formula for starting a counselling business for under £370. So if you're thinking of starting a counselling business, this really is a must listen to. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 375 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. Rory and I walking you through 3 stops today, starting off with a continuation of the chat around AI. And today we're going to be speaking in ethical sustainable practice about confidentiality and data privacy. How do we navigate that in this new age of AI? We then have Practice Matters, and it's a real goodie today. It's going to appeal to absolutely everybody, and it's Dara McLaughlin returning to visit us to speak about the secrets of a successful website. Rory's already introduced Dara. He's been on our podcast a number of times and always a firm favourite. You will take something away from that. And then we're going to student services, and I think a topic that will appeal to students just as well as qualified colleagues, because today we're speaking about how counsellors handle disagreements with colleagues. These, of course, happen during your studies, but they can continue throughout the whole of your counselling career. So we're going to be diving deep into that. But starting off, Rory, in ethical sustainable practice, we're speaking about confidentiality and data privacy in the age of AI. And I think just before we go into this, Rory, if I can introduce it by saying we've been speaking over the last few episodes about how you might assess or evaluate an AI tool, and we've been kind of promising that there's 10 questions you can ask yourself when you come to this topic, and I'm going to run over what those 10 questions are very briefly, and we'll do this in the episodes to come as well. We'll do it each week, but then each week we're going to take one of them and delve into that. So Rory, I'm going to go over the 10 questions and then going to hand over to you to delve deep into question number 2. So the 10 questions are these. This is the 10 domains of the critical thinking matrix, the questions we ask when we're choosing to use a tool. And they are: 1, intended purpose and regulatory status; 2, confidentiality and data privacy, which we're going to be delving into today; 3, informed consent; 4, therapeutic relationship and depersonalization; 5, bias and discrimination; 6, professional accountability and responsibility; 7, technical readability and validity; and then 8, client autonomy; 9, regulatory and ethical alignment; and then 10, implementation, monitoring and reviewing. And if that sounds a little bit confusing, don't worry. We're going to walk you through each one of them step by step. And I just want to correct number 7. I said technical readability and validity, and it's not. It's technical reliability and responsibility. But there they are. Those are the 10. We're not going to do number 1, which is intended purpose and regulatory status. And the reason for that is we covered it in a recent podcast episode. Basically, it's looking at a tool and going, is this a mental health tool that is designed specifically? Is it an LLM, or is it a generic AI tool that is being offered on the internet? And we have delved into that one quite deep already in an episode. But today, Rory, I'm going to hand over to you to walk us through, when we're talking about AI, confidentiality and data privacy. What do we need to know?
Well, I think we should start from first principles, Ken. And first principles are confidentiality. Anybody who's ever done a counselling course will know that confidentiality is at the root of the work we do. It's discussed in probably most classroom sessions, and also in professional conversations, whether you're in supervision or whether you're just chatting with a colleague. And I guess with that first principle goes a question: where does my client's data go? So, we're now well past the time where a therapist would sit after the client's gone, write some notes on a piece of paper, put them in a file, put them in a briefcase or a carrying bag, and go back to their home and lock them in a filing cabinet, or go back into the office and lock them into the filing cabinet. Those days, I'm sure some people do that. But those days are kind of disappearing now. And data is stored more and more electronically. So when we're thinking of using anything, we need to think, where does my client's data go? And this is important because when clients come to therapy, they're sharing really deeply personal information that they may have not spoken to anybody about. And it's not really ordinary data. It's sensitive, it's protected, and it's entrusted to you in confidence. So when we think about digital tools that we use in our practice, questions about where the information goes, who can access it, and how long it takes, how long it's kept, is really, really important. And confidentiality doesn't stop at the therapy room door. If you use a digital platform, so let's think you might use an app-taking note system or a transcription service or an AI tool, your ethical responsibility travels with that data. It's no good saying, well, it's a well-known company, and I expect them to look after the data. It's your responsibility. If a client's data gets leaked and it comes back to something you're using, then the onus is on you. If you haven't done due diligence and taken a professional view on the apps you use, you could be in real difficulty. And of course, it's not only about therapists, it's about the client. No client wants to see their information across the internet, where, not that we need reminding, it's virtually impossible to remove it. Once it's out on the web, it's there forever. So I think a useful starting point when you're thinking about confidentiality and data protection is, does the provider give a clear and specific privacy policy? So when you download any app data, there's policies and procedures or policies that the provider has, the software provider has. If you click on it, it will tell you what legislation their product abides by. And what you're looking for, if you're in the UK, is UK GDPR, I'll put my teeth back in again, UK GDPR compliance. You'll need to know whether the data is stored, that's important, how long it's retained, who can access it, and what would the process be if there was a data breach. And if this information is vague, difficult to find, or written in a way that avoids direct answers, I think that should give you pause. You need to take a breath and think, is this something that I want to put my valuable client data in? The best way of thinking about it is, it's literally like putting your money in a bank. the data, if you think of data as your money, you put it in a bank and they go, well, how's it secured? They go, oh, we stick it in a cupboard, by the door. You think, oh, I'm not going to put my money there, so anybody could access it. Well, the same thing goes with your client data. So I think the first place is in those policy documents, isn't it?
It is, and you started with exactly the correct question to be asking yourself. So when we're speaking about data protection and we're speaking about online, and it doesn't necessarily need to be AI, it can be any digital storage, that first question is, where does my client's data go? And that applies even if you're putting your client's data into something like MS Word and saving it on your hard drive. Where's it going? Ask yourself that question first, because there's another part to this, and you mentioned the ethics very strongly, Rory, and it's 100% true that that confidentiality is the cornerstone of counselling and psychotherapy. That's why people come to us and they entrust us with that information. However, there's another level to this. It is legislation. We are bound by the law to keep our clients' details confidential, and the information that a client shares with us, and the moment they share any medical information with us, and that can be a previous assessment they had, or it can be anything at all, the medication that they're using, the data automatically falls under what is called special category data, and this is under UK GDPR legislation. So special category data is handled more sensitively than just general data. So we're holding the highest category of data as counselors and psychotherapists, and the buck stops with us. If we put that data into something that is not secure or that we don't fully understand, and as you mentioned, Rory, that information is leaked or accessed without knowledge, or because of us not thinking this through, we are accountable. We're legally accountable as well as ethically accountable for this. And in February 2026, a new act came into force in the United Kingdom. It's called DUAA. Go look it up. DUAA. And basically, there's not a massive change in it. It just reinforces and underlines the UK GDPR, what was already in UK GDPR, which suggests that the data shared in counselling and psychotherapy is special category. So where's it going? Where is it stored? And can it be reused or accessed by anybody else other than yourself, who has a legitimate use for using that information, and the client if they ask for that? So that's question number one that we ask ourselves. And Rory, you mentioned, if you're looking at an AI tool, or even just an automation tool or a note storage tool, anything that is digital, you want to be looking at the privacy policy of the provider of that service, and you're going to be asking specific questions around that. And you're going to start with, is it UK GDPR compliant? And you can even extend that a little bit more. So we've got GDPR, which applies in the European Union, and then we have UK GDPR with the splitting, with Brexit, of the UK coming out of Europe. UK GDPR was basically European GDPR, but split off and then adjusted slightly for the United Kingdom. But you're pretty safe with EU GDPR as well. So is it compliant? And it should state in a privacy policy how data is managed, stored, and whether it is compliant. And that's one of the questions you're asking yourself as you're looking at that privacy policy. And what you are also, if you're taking that data and holding it, you're the controller of that data. You're classified under UK GDPR as a data controller because you have that client's information. So it's a legal designation. And if the tool mishandles your client's data in any way, that accountability doesn't fall on that app developer. It falls on you, because we're supposed to read those terms and policy terms and conditions and the privacy policy before we make a decision to use a certain tool. So that's really, really important. And if you're not sure, if you look through maybe their privacy policy or the terms and conditions and you can't find any reference to GDPR compliance, write to them and ask them before you choose to use that tool within your practice, because that is the due diligence we're looking at here. The thinking of how you go about choosing this and having defensible decision making. If you get a reply from them saying, yes, this is our GDPR compliance, here's our ICO number, you write that down and you're keeping a professional record of defensible decision making of why you chose that specific tool. Now, a reflective question for you on this one. Can you find a clear, specific privacy policy? Not a claim, not marketing, but actual detail of the information, which is where is the data stored? How long is it retained? Who can access it? And what happens in a breach? These are 4 areas that should be covered in a privacy policy or in terms and conditions of an application that you choose to trust your client's data with. And then the next thing I wanted to touch on, Rory, is where is the data stored? And where the data stored is, so if you put your client's data, let's say, into a note-taking application, where's it going? Where's the actual end point where that data ends up? So here, if it's a server based in the United Kingdom, then it is protected by the law, UK GDPR. There are laws of how data is stored in the same way as we have to follow those laws. So do the companies that hold those servers and keep data on them. So it will be classified as mental health information, so that's special category data. So you're pretty much protected there. The same in the EU. You're kind of protected by EU GDPR. But many times, these companies might not be based in the EU, or they might not be based in the United Kingdom. They might be based, and I'm just going to use an example, in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And the information that you're putting in may go right across the ocean and be stored on a server in the United States or anywhere else within the world. And there are different laws. So a US company may be subjected to laws like the US Cloud Act that allows government agencies to compel access to data on their servers, including data belonging to your UK clients. So as soon as we let that go out of the EU or the United Kingdom, the protections that you get from UK GDPR and the legislations to protect that data can be eroded. And we just need to be aware of that. And it's not to say that you would never use a server that is outside of the United Kingdom, but you would understand how that process might work and you would critically think it through as you're making that decision to use that tool, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And the thing is with, these modern apps that you can get, their marketing is very, very polished. You look at it and you think, oh yeah, that's wonderful, secure. They may talk about encryption and this type of thing, but really the devil is in the detail. It's in those policies. Have a look at those policies and look past, the polished marketing language. And it's whether you can clearly understand how the client information is treated. And I think one of the ways to test that is if you can explain to your client very simply how the information's stored, how the information's protected, and what happens in case of a breach, then almost certainly you'll have understood what the company's policy is. But if you can't, or it becomes a little bit complicated, almost certainly it probably, if you can't explain it to your client, it's probably a warning bell to say, I wonder if this app is good for me. And I want to share a little bit of information which is not widely known, is that data is probably the biggest commodity in the world. It's bigger than oil. People buy and sell data. it's a thing. You can go and buy and sell data. I'm not going to go into how that market works, but it is a market. It's a commodity. It's sold and bought by companies. And, you don't want your clients' information to form part of that trade. So be really, really thoughtful on that. I would say, think about how long the data's stored for, because usually within a contract, certainly in the UK, the rule is 7 years. It can vary, so no letters in the postbag, please. Can vary, but generally speaking, it's 7 years from when the client finishes, you keep their data, or if the client is under 18, 7 years after they become 18. So if you've got a 15-year-old client, you're possibly going to hold that data for 12 or 13 years before you can erase it. And the reason for that is if there's ever a complaint, one of the things they may ask you for is your contract, and also you would have to be able to access your notes to be able to defend any complaint that's brought. So if you're putting your information into an app, you want to know that the app's going to be around for a bit. You don't want to wake up one morning, log in to find the company's got into receivership along with your data and it's disappeared. So have a think about that. And I think in practice, the question's really simple. Could you confidently justify your choice for a digital tool to your client, your supervisor, your insurance, and your professional body? I think those are the acid test, really. And if the answer is no, then I think really you need to do a bit more checking before you rely on it, Ken.
Yeah, and it just is that we don't have to understand the technical side of what the app does and how it works and all the moving parts of it. We don't have to become technicians. We've just got to ask, I guess, the same ethical questions we would ask if we were in a room with a client. We would say, can anybody see through the window? Can anybody hear from outside the door? Is this confidential? Where am I going to store these notes? Even if you're writing them down and putting them in a filing cabinet, who has access to that filing cabinet? Who else goes in that filing cabinet? Does it have a lock? Is that lock secure? It's the same questions. We're not changing the questions. It's just applying to a digital tool. I want to just retouch, if I can, before I also want to go on to that, how long is it kept for, because I think that's an important one. But before we go there, just when I was speaking about the servers and where they're based, it doesn't mean that if you're using an application that has servers that are outside the UK that you can't use them. What is usually in place is what's called a data processing agreement. It's a DPA, and it's agreement between a supplier. So I'm going to use as an example here, let's say Zoom. A lot of people use Zoom maybe to see a client online. I'm not saying it's a good tool or a bad tool. I'm just saying that many people use that tool. Well, if you go and look at Zoom DPA, which is Data Processing Agreement, they will have an agreement that you can download and sign, and it's a contract between you and that provider, showing how they manage that data and how they're going to protect it for you, even if it's outside of the UK. So if something is outside of the UK, look for a DPA, Data Processing Agreement. And even if you are dealing with a company inside the EU or the UK, a Data Processing Agreement gives you an extra level of security. It's like having a contract with your supplier saying, you know what, we take this seriously, this is how it all works. And within the DPA, they will outline how that data is, how it is stored. So the reflective question here, is the data stored in the UK, or does it travel to servers in other countries? If it leaves the UK, what are the safeguards that the provider will provide for you? And is there a data processing agreement that you can have on file and that you can even show your clients and show them how their data is handled on your behalf? So it's just about making decisions without with a thought pattern behind it, without just going, oh, that looks like a nice tool. That's got a lot of people saying it's a great tool. I'm going to sign up for that. Do you agree to the terms and conditions? Yes, I do. It's just that extra step, I guess. And we're called on by legislation and by our ethics to go through this thinking process. And you mentioned the data retention, Rory. BACP, and we're based in the UK, so I'm going to say BACP, UKCP, NCPS. If you go and look to the ethical bodies, they will have different times that you will hold data for different types of clients. So if you're working with somebody under the age of 18, you're going to need to hold that data for a longer period of time. There are also legal precedents of how long data should be held for. Now, you expect that you would learn that when you're studying your counselling, or you could look to your ethical body to understand what that is. So here's the consideration. You've already said, Rory, will that provider still be around in the 7 years that I need my data to be around for? And the other one is, what happens if you decide that you don't want to use that tool anymore? Let's say you're using tool A and you're paying your monthly subscription to use tool A, and you go, I don't like that tool anymore. I can't afford it anymore. I'm not going to pay it anymore. What happens to your data if you are no longer paying that bill? So if I think about my streaming services like Netflix or Amazon Prime, as soon as my bill stops getting paid, everything is gone. It's gone. They just take it away and I can't access it anymore. And the question is, if you stopped paying that provider, would you still be able to access the data of the clients? If you were called upon in a formal legal request to produce the notes, if you went to that provider and you were no longer paying their monthly bill, could you still access the data of the clients that you saw on that platform or that you recorded on that platform back in that time? So that is an interesting question to ask. And then there are also other applications that actually have an auto delete function. And what this auto delete function does is it basically says if data is older than X amount, let's say 12 months old, then we're just going to delete it. If they haven't used it, we're going to delete that because we don't want to take up server space, because that's what costs us the money. So you don't want something that's going to auto delete so that you go back 5 years after you saw the client and you now have a reason to call on those notes, and you go look at them and they go, oh no, we deleted those 3 years ago. You need to know that it's still going to be there. Those records, you have to retain them for at least 6 years or longer. So that is well worth thinking about. When we're talking about confidentiality and privacy, we've already covered this, but we're going to cover it again. Never put any client data in any form whatsoever into a large language model, an off-the-shelf LLM like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity. There's a whole load of different platforms. Never put the client's data into that. And the reason for that is because that we don't know where that data is going. We don't know how it's stored. Very often it can be used for training, and sometimes, sadly, it can be used for advertising purposes. So clients' data can be taken and used for that. And we've spoken before, and we'll just reiterate this as we come to the end of this topic, and that is the invisible AI scenario. So we might go, I'm going to give you an example here. You know what? I keep all of my notes. Now, this is not me saying this. This is just a scenario here, Rory. I keep all of my notes in Word documents, and I keep them on my in a hard drive, which is password protected on my very own computer, so I know that I am compliant and there's no hassles there. And the way that I make my notes is, rather than writing them, is I use a voice dictator, and I say the client, blah, 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 and I speak my notes out, and then I save those files so I am compliant. Well, there's invisible AI in that process, and that is the voice dictation. If you're using voice dictation to make notes, what's happening with that voice dictation is you speak the words, that goes to a server somewhere, and it's usually outside of the United Kingdom. It's changed into text, and that text is presented back to you. It looks like magic. It looks like as you say it, so it happens, but it doesn't work like that. So it is invisible AI, and the same rules apply. If we're speaking out our clients' notes, we're using their sensitive data, and we don't know where it's going.
No.
Unless, of course, we've looked into that. So there's the bottom line. It's is know where your client's data is going, and keep a record to show that you've kind of documented everything along the process there, Rory.
Absolutely. We don't want to frighten people. And think, if you're sitting there thinking, "Oh, this is too much," I trained as a therapist. Now I've literally got to retrain as a lawyer. As long as you go through the steps that we've talked about in our discussion, and also we've got a really helpful handout. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 375, click the podcast tab, episode 375, you'll find a really helpful handout that you can use as a basis for sort of your defensible decision making. You can have a look at it. You could also, when it's available, get hold of or borrow or buy even Ken's book, because all of this that we're talking about in the podcast at the moment comes from Ken's new book, Ethical AI in Practice for Counsellors and Psychotherapists. And it's a really detailed book. I'm lucky enough to have a advanced copy of it, and I think it's going to be one of those really essential books that you have on your bookshelf, because we are now in the time of AI. But just to get back to not being frightened, as long as you've done due diligence and you can evidence what you've done, your thinking process, how you've looked at the tool, should there be a breach and should a complaint be raised, you can go into the meeting, at least with some confidence that you can say, look, I've done everything I possibly can to make sure that what I used was confidential. I've got the DPA, the Digital Processing Agreement. I've got their policy on UK GDPR. I've got my contract with my client where I've said that I'm going to be using this, and that will go a long way. You can't. The thing is, you can't guarantee when you're using any form of digital storage that it's going to be 100% protected. It just doesn't happen. But what you can do is do due diligence. It's rather like putting your seatbelt on when you get into your car. Can't guarantee you're not going to have a crash, but you've got a very good chance of coming out okay if you've got your seatbelt on. So think of it as your digital
protection.
Seatbelt.
I like that, Rory. It is protection. And you might listen to this and go, oh, that's so much to remember. It's such a lot of stuff. It's not. It really is. It's 3 questions. It's really 3 questions. We've just dug deep into those 3 questions and expanded on them a little bit and told you why they're there and that the law is there. You don't have to go and learn all of that stuff. Here's the 3 questions. Where does my client's data go? If you can't answer it, go and find out. Then the next question is it stored outside the UK? And then the third question is, can it be reused or accessed beyond the therapy that I offer? It's those 3 simple questions that we've just expanded on. Go get that handout, Counselling Tutor, podcast tab, episode 375. Go and download it. It's all there for you. You can file it, you can refer back to it, and you can kind of go and look at the tools that you might be using at the moment and ask yourself, do I comply to number 2? Data confidentiality and data privacy. And next week, we're going to be covering informed consent, which is question number 3. Can my client generally understand what tool does and how their data is used? So that will be diving into that next week, and how we record the client informed consent and why it's necessary. And that, Rory, is ethical, sustainable practice for today. And we move out of ethical, sustainable practice into practice matters. And Rory, you caught up with Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, who is a sponsor of the Counselling Tutor Podcast and who is an absolute whiz and expert on all things website. What can we expect from this discussion, Rory?
Well, we can expect the curtain to be pulled back on how websites work and, what makes a successful website. Dara is a real expert in this area. I caught up with him and he shared the secrets of a successful website. This is what he had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
You've done the hard bit, the training, the placements, meeting the dreaded criteria and gaining the counselling hours. And now you're ready to move into private practice. For many therapists, the next big step is creating a website, which for some can feel really overwhelming. How do you make sure people can actually find you online? How do you promote yourself to potential clients in a way that is ethical and professional? And how do you present your experience and services you offer with clarity and confidence? Well, to help us unpack all of that, we are joined by someone who is very much in the know. Welcome back, Dara McLaughlin. Welcome, Dara. And first of all, can I say congratulations on a fantastic feat. Solo rowing across the Atlantic, world's toughest row, single winner. Congratulations.
Hey, Rory, thank you so much. Yeah, what an amazing experience that was. Mother Nature is fantastic. The ocean taught me quite a bit, probably enough to fill a lot of your listeners' appointment slots for quite the months to come. But yeah, a fantastic opportunity to row across the ocean, and thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. It was great to see the messages when I got back onto terra firma, and it's still soaking in. So yeah, delighted to have done it, and delighted to be back here. I can assure you that.
Fantastic, and now you're back on dry land, literally. We could talk about what makes a good online presence. And I think, we've talked a lot about specific things such as, websites and how to do some marketing. But today, I think we're going into the kind of micro world where we could look at real things that will make a big difference to someone who wants to market themselves online. And one of the things I think that is really precedent in the new world of therapy is local versus online practice, and how therapists can kind of shape their, if they have a website, how would that look?
That's a great question, and there is no doubt about it. Since the era of COVID, local versus online is so much more in early conversations that we have with clients who are building a website, and even people who are starting off in private practice. A genuine question they're saying to themselves is, should I be practicing exclusively online? Is this the norm? Is this what people are used to? And obviously, there's a lot of debate around the bona fide of certain online providers, but certainly there's a lot of aggregators who are now encouraging a lot of online practice and online therapy sessions with clients. So it is certainly in the spotlight. When it comes to a website, we always say to people, proceed cautiously, because it comes back to this fundamental point when you're being found in the search engines, which is where it's all at. People who are practicing exclusively online are now competing with the entire UK market. So you're now competing against, somebody in Cornwall is competing against somebody in Glasgow. Somebody in the Midlands is competing against somebody in London, and so on and so forth. You're not competing against somebody in Ireland or the US, because culturally and systematically we have different ways of doing our therapy. And I think, it rules them out of the equation. But certainly when it comes to the UK, you're now competing against a much broader pool of people. And that makes it very hard to get any sort of traction online. So I would always caution people going in thinking, I'm going to work exclusively online and I'm going to speak to that topic only on my website. I would always, ground yourself in a location, because from our experience, the search engines, even though you're looking for an online therapist, will still try and match you with somebody geographically relatively close. So, if you're down in Cornwall, for example, it's less likely they're going to bounce you up to Glasgow. Google is probably going to return somebody that's going to be Dorset, maybe as far away as London, but you're not going to get somebody from, say, above Manchester upwards. It's going to be in the lower half of the country. That is what we're experiencing. So, that does certainly narrow the market in terms of your competition a bit, but still identifying yourself as being somewhere locally will help. So we often find that hybrid works really well with people, where they say, yes, I see clients in person in Cornwall, but I also operate online. And then when they're on their directory profiles, and maybe, they specialize in a particular area of practice. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's anxiety. I know that's not very specialized, but let's just say that they do. Somebody is looking for a therapist to help them with their anxiety. And on your directory listing, you can then say, well, hey, listen, I practice exclusively online. And you can kind of pull people in like that through the specialisms. But if you're just trying to be very generic and say, I'm an online counsellor in the UK, I'm going to say you're going to face a very hard road to get any sort of traction in the search engines getting found. I will try and lead with some element of location and some specificity in terms of where you really like to practice and where you can really return value for your clients. So that is the dilemma. We'd all like to be working on a beach in Spain if we could, but if we're going to build a sustainable practice, Rory, we kind of need to have that hybrid, or at the very least, we need to be really mindful about the competition pool, which is huge when you're trying to compete against all your colleagues in the UK.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point you make. There are a lot of online platforms, we won't name them, but I think anybody in the therapy space will know that you can sign up to certain platforms and they will propel you, in some cases, worldwide. I don't know how successful they are, and I do take your points about working internationally. A lot of people do work internationally. America's very different because they have laws and regulations, as do other countries. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes culturally, the kind of sensibility of how a therapist practices and who they are doesn't transmit well across national borders unless they're very, very attuned to another person's culture. So I think you make a good point there. And also it's really fascinating that I'm hearing you say that although therapy's expanded because of COVID, people could go now online and work anywhere. It sounds like Google, which is the biggest search engine. Everybody talks about Googling. Other search engines are available before we get any letters. However, what you're saying is that even if you do set up kind of to be an international therapist, in terms of the search engine, they'll return you very, very locally. The way you'll be indexed will be to your locality.
Yeah, it's a funny one, and I think it's also, we have to remember how search engines work, and this, I could talk about this in itself for hours and hours, but it's quite a technical process beneath the bonnet. And Google and the other search engines will work on the basis of, if Rory and 1,000 other people like Rory like something, then maybe Dara might like it too. And Google uses signals, and those signals it gets from your browsing preferences. If you're using a Google-owned platform like YouTube, it will infer certain information from you. And once there's a trend towards people selecting online therapists from their locality, and let's cast the net wider and say, up to 500 miles away, then Google kind of says, well, you know what, actually, this works. Because to put everybody in the same pool and get them to compete against each other, it would be nigh on impossible to provide usable, functional, valuable search results to people. Like, I don't want to search for an online therapist and get somebody in Germany. I just think if someone gave me an option, would you like to work with somebody in Germany or would you like to work with somebody in the UK? I think I would keep it towards the UK, because I just feel that instantly that person is going to have more of an understanding about me. And, if I'm stressed about the news and the fact that the budget is coming up or whatever, that there's some background knowledge there. I have less explaining of myself to do. And even though that therapist in Germany might be super dialed in, might read the FT every day and the Guardian and whatnot, still, it's the same reason that we advise people to put pictures on their website to introduce themselves. I think instantly you have more of a rapport with somebody who's generally speaking in your neighborhood than you feel that you might have off the bat with somebody the other side of the world. That's my thinking on it. And I think that's where Google is going with it too. And we have to remember that Google has such an abundance of data, and data doesn't lie. So if it's a case of, they're redirecting you to somebody in your locality, I use that term in inverted commas, then I think there's probably good reason, because it represents what your peers are doing. And therefore it infers that it's probably the best solution.
Yeah, and I know therapists who do work internationally, but I think the conversations I've had would be maybe the occasional client who may have moved or is going on holiday and needs some support. It's very, very unusual. It does happen, but it's very unusual for someone, say, in the United States to contact someone in the UK and say, I need therapy, because America is well serviced in therapy. So I think that's a really, really good point. Don't set up a website to be an international therapist, because Google itself will, or the search engines will limit your reach. Obviously, Dara, counselling is an ethical endeavour, and we're bound by codes of ethics depending on which professional body you are subscribed to. And ethics doesn't just mean how we practice. It means in all our dealings, whether it be how we deal with our clients, but certainly in this conversation, it's about ethics and websites. It's really important that when someone puts a website together, that they're ethical, isn't it? And that they abide by ethics.
Yeah, and I think that can be forgotten about sometimes when we think about services. If you were to buy a product from a website, if there's any sort of risk that what you might receive, I was looking at Easter eggs only this last week with my kids, and I had an Aero Easter egg from my troubles, and it said, the box had a printed picture of this Easter egg, and it said, box graphic is only a representation and mightn't reflect what you actually get. It's the same with the burgers that you might get in the takeaway. They look fantastic, but maybe when you get it looks like something's rolled over it, And so services should be no different. We have to make sure that we represent ourselves correctly. And, that can be things like, what are my qualifications? We need to make sure that we don't overstate or understate them. We need to let people know, because they're effectively shopping for somebody who's going to help them. That sounds a little bit cold, but it certainly is. And it's not to devalue the work that's been done, but people are window shopping when they browse the websites, and it's down to you to capture their attention. And if you represent yourself honestly and fully, I think you have more of a chance of not only engaging with that person initially, but in leading them through their therapeutic journey successfully. Because the last thing you want to do is establish this one-to-one relationship with somebody on their journey and then feel that perhaps you sold them a pup. You told them you could do something you couldn't. You told them you had more experience. And could you imagine going into a session with a therapist thinking that they've maybe helped people through my condition or my particular area of concern many times over, only to find they hadn't? That would be just absolutely, it would be a blow to your confidence as a client. So I think setting out your stall early doors fully and completely, I think really sets the tone for a trusting, valuable and successful relationship with your clients. I know the therapeutic journey is really important to clients, but I also know it's really important to the therapist giving the therapy. And that's why in your therapeutic contract that you might set out with your client, you'll say, I don't necessarily want to see you just one and done. I want to see you regularly, because I have a responsibility to make sure that you get out of this better than you came into it. And having trustworthy honest representations on your website about what you can do and how you can do it is fundamental to that. If you want your client to adhere to that contract, you need to adhere to it yourself by putting in the right stuff. So yeah, representation of your qualifications and having them bang on is so important. And misleading claims, what you can and can't help with, that can be an area of concern sometimes. People tend to cast the net maybe too far and wide. And as I said, they can be found out then. So really, stick to what it is you feel you really have the skill set in helping with. And don't scope creep, don't skill creep. Don't maybe say you can help solve or help assuage with something that you really don't think that you can, just with the view to beginning conversations with people. In the long term, it'll do you more harm than good.
Yeah, absolutely, Dara. And I think as someone who had a private practice, one of the things that I did was had a long conversation with my supervisor just on what I could offer, because I really think that occasionally some therapists leave training and they think they can cure a rainy day. You know what I mean? And I think it's about thinking, if I get someone who's got alcohol addiction, can I help with curing someone of alcohol addiction? And, it's being really, really, really honest. And you'd want that honesty, like you said with the Easter egg. You buy your kids an Easter egg at Easter if you buy Easter eggs. Other confectionery is available, but you at least expect when you open the box to be some resemblance of what's on the outside. If you open the box and there's nothing like that, you'd be incredibly disappointed. Now, in terms of confectionery, that you'd probably eat what was in the box and wouldn't buy it again. But in terms of therapy, it can be devastating. So, it's a plea really to anyone listening. Have a real good honest conversation with your peers or your supervisor about what you can really work with. And I think that's in service of your clients and in service of you, because people will complain,
Yeah.
And, and misleading claims. I've never actually come across a website in the UK that said, I can cure this. But I've had a look at a few in America that this literally can cure a rainy day, some of these people. Don't know how they do it. Curing autism was one that I came across. I could cure autism.
Dear God.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was very, very, very frightening. So, yeah, avoid misleading claims. Be honest with your qualifications, which, in my experience, clients don't look at anyway. They're really interested in gaining help. And also things like contact forms and confidentiality. If you have a contact form on your website, why is it important we need to think really clearly about that?
Well, most of the listeners who are listening today will most likely be registered with the ICO. And you need to be if you're processing people's personal data. And so, it comes back to your privacy policy on your website. What are you using your contact forms for? And where does that go? And I think, it's no harm outlining that, and you need to outline it to potential users of your website to say, well, what are you using this data for? And Rory, I know in your Facebook group, it's regularly mentioned, the confidentiality element of things, because it's very easy to identify people these days, where a lot of people are online. You could take someone's first name and last name, or even initial of their first name and their last name, and you can plug it into the web, and you can find out a lot about people.
Yeah.
So I think outlining your intentions with contact forms, what it is that you're using them for, how long you're going to store that information, really, really, really important. But it also instills confidence in people that you're professional and that, you're thinking about their best interests and you're not, neglecting their personal data, which is so important. And, I think that's a cornerstone of an ethical practice too, that you only use that data for the purpose that it's been sought, but that you clearly state to people who are filling those contact forms what it is that you're going to use that data for. So yeah, super important to consider that.
Absolutely. And as someone who ran my own website, and I don't run the Counselling Tutor website. We have some fantastic people in the back office who do that. But I know that the websites need updating a lot. You know, I would come into mine on a Monday morning and notice that I'd had to download something from the website. You know, it was I forget who it was now, but whoever created the website I had to download something, a security patch here and a security patch there. And one of the patches that I had to do was to remove my an online form because it had been compromised and people could hack it. Now, the difference between being your own person and making your own website and having someone do it for you is that you do have that back office that I was talking about. You have people who are updating it. And, you know, from your point of view, that's your job really, is that you run websites, you look at the security of them.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's, you know, the caveat there is that some people do come to us in Web Healer and they say, listen, I have had somebody looking after my website and they built it originally for me, but they've gone. And that's a common story we get. In fact, really, we get it at least once or twice a week. So I think if you're going to work with anybody on building a website, you need to ask them about that post go live period. What happens if there is some updating, some security updates, because unfortunately that's just the way of the world these days. What if we need to do an update? Are you going to do it for me? Are you going to be proactive about it? Are you going to be reactive? We have, at least I can only speak to Webular, we have an ongoing, it's a weekly review of all the systems to make sure that there's nothing happening out there which is untoward. But it's so important when choosing a provider to speak to them about that and say, listen, how can I ensure the confidentiality of my client's information when it comes through my website? And what happens if? And, you know, pose that question, see what the response is going to be, and make sure that you're happy with it, and make sure that it aligns with the type of practice that you want to run, make sure that it aligns with your privacy policy, and make sure it aligns with, you know, the compliance standards and the, you know, the requirements of your professional or your ethical body. Make sure that it aligns with their guidance too, because this, you know, data is key these days and it's very much in focus. So making sure that you have a relationship with somebody to look after that is very important. Don't leave it to chance.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, Dara, and also I think it's, you know, in terms of defensible decision making, if you've had that conversation with your web provider, notarize it. So if anything happens and you're called to account, you can then say, well, I had this conversation. Emailer is always good, and say, look, this is what they said they've done. I'm not a technical person, but I have done due diligence, and you know, if a website were to get hacked, and they do, you know, they can do. You have some defensive decision making. Finally, Dara, you know, I've always said that clients meet you first when they come on the website or your listing. That's where you first met. So, what are clients looking for when they land on a counselling website?
What are they looking for? Well, they're looking to see if you align with them. And that can mean a lot of things. Do you align with them in terms of how they can help, how you can help the client? So do you have the specialist training, the CPD work, the qualifications to help them with their particular area of interest? I go back to this concept of anxiety because I know it's not very specialist, but it's a topic. You want to know, can this person help me? You want to know, is this person qualified to help me? We spoke many times about know, like, and trust. Do we know this person after visiting their website? A picture is so important. We're very judgmental people. And so seeing a picture of somebody, like it or hate it, is so important to have on your website, because if you do not have a picture, and we have some stats that you will not get as many inquiries through your website as if you had a picture. And if you choose to go all out, and if you choose to put a video, embed a small candid video of yourself on your website, you will receive even more inquiries through your website, because it gives an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to somebody. People already offer these 15-minute introductory calls, or I don't know what you want to call them, but intro calls, to see if there's a fit between the therapist and the person. You can take care of all of that on the web without having to have those 15-minute calls, by presenting yourself in such a way that people feel comfortable that you're the therapist to work with them. So picture, qualifications, speak to your areas of expertise and why you think you can help them. And I think what's really, really important, especially for clients who may feel anxious about navigating online spaces, or if they feel anxious about the therapeutic journey, is use your website to walk them through what a typical session would look like and what a typical series of sessions looks like. How can I expect to feel after attending sessions for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months? If you go to a personal trainer, they'll say, well, your first week you're going to be sore as heck. Your second week you're not going to be sore and you're going to start to feel better. By month 2 or 3, you maybe it'll drop a few kilos and you'll feel a bit stronger. By month 6, people will start to take notice of you and say, wow, you're looking great. Why can't we do that with the therapeutic journey and say that, if you come and see me without making any outlandish claims, such as curing the rainy day, but there's no doubt about it, somebody who engages fully with you as a therapist is going to incrementally feel better the longer they're in the session. So I think there's no harm in walking through what a start, middle, and end of that journey might look like for somebody. And that will just help them feel more at ease with you and with the possibility of reaching out to you with a view to arranging a session. I think it's about making people feel comfortable and safe. And there's just a few small things that you need to do in order to achieve that.
I like that. And I also think that, therapists should say that things might get, slightly more difficult before they get better. As with the personal training journey, you start off and you might ache and hurt and think, oh, this is not for me. And if you're not given that information up front, and this is quite normal, you're going to ache, and then as the weeks go on, you're going to feel better, or you might feel better. I think that's really, really important information. I think this has been a really interesting conversation, because I think we've uncovered quite a few areas of knowledge where maybe they weren't very visible, especially the bit about how Google prioritises local search. And also I think about things such as confidentiality contact forms, making sure that your website is updated with the latest security, which if you use an external provider, that should, or in your case, Dara, will happen. So that brings us to the end of our time together. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It just goes for me to say, Dara McLaughlin, thank you for joining us.
If you're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got one that could do with an upgrade, WebHealer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners £100 off the cost of a website design and build. WebHealer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's all they do. Their team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution so that you can focus on your time with your clients. They've been doing this for over 20 years and are a trusted name amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. Get the full package details and claim your £100 off coupon at counsellingtutor.com/website. Massive thank you to Dara. Always a pleasure to hear from Dara. Always got the best tips in the business. Really knows his stuff. Thank you to you, Rory, for always holding those interesting discussions. And that was today's Practice Matters. I'm excited for the next section, Rory, because we have Sarah Henry, our outside correspondent, our roving reporter, who's going to be weighing in on this topic as well. And I always love hearing what she has to say, working in the trenches, out there, front line, and experiencing this firsthand and sharing that information with us. And of course, in Student Services today, the topic that we're discussing is how counsellors handle disagreements with colleagues. I got to start by asking, Rory, there's disagreements by counsellors counsellors? Surely
yes.
not.
You put you put 3 counsellors in a room and you'll get 4 opinions. Definitely. So yes, and this is an interesting one because this does come up in our Facebook group quite often. Just how to handle disagreements. And if you want to join our Facebook community, go to Facebook, Counselling Tutor, knock on the door, and you'll be in, and you'll be able to see all the wonderful questions and answers that people give. So yeah, well, I'm going to start off by saying that more recently, and I'm going to say over the last maybe 10 years, we have a duty of candour. So if something isn't right, if you think someone's, I don't know, not being ethical, or you feel that, you know, maybe they're having personal difficulties that might be affecting their work, you really have a duty of candour. You have a duty to speak up. And it's the way that you speak up and the way you approach it that can either be very collegial, help people along, give people pause for thought, or it can basically get into a row and a slanging match. And we want the former, not the latter. So I think the thing to do is to, you know, if you have a disagreement with a colleague, what I would think is to, first of all, write it down. Write down what the issue is and have a think about it. And if you've got the time. And the reason for that is when we write things down, we tend to see them in a different perspective. And once they're written down, we might think, well, thinking about it, is it really something I need to speak about? Or we might think, yes, it is. And actually seeing it, this is the way I can handle it. And I think the bottom line, Ken, is respect. We should always have respectful conversations with people. And I think also picking the time when we do it. If someone's very stressed, probably isn't the best time to say to them, look, I've seen you do this and I'm not very happy about it, because, you know, stressed people usually are in fight or flight mode, and it may not end well. And just sit down and just say something along the lines of, look, I've seen, you know, what you've been doing, and I just wonder, do you think this is the right way of handling this situation? And try and talk it through, and, you know, have a professional and collegial conversation. And I think that can take time, and also it takes a lot of courage, Ken.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and you know, you're speaking about the pointy end of the stick when you're saying you're speaking about candor, and you'll find candor in your ethical framework. Certainly in the BACP ethical framework, we're called upon. And candor is that if we do see anything that is kind of outside of what is good ethical practice, that we would call that out. But not all disagreements are around that, you know. So we need to first look at what is this disagreement about.
Yes.
And, you know, I think of Carl Rogers' 7 stages of process when I think about this, you know. Down at the early stages of process, there is this, I'm right, this is my view, this is my truth, this is my opinion. Anybody else that comes in with a different thought or opinion on this is wrong. I'm going to defend my opinion. So I think that when it comes to disagreements, the first thing that I suggest is that you look to self. There you go. People are calling in already, Rory. There's the excitement.
There's a complaint coming in there, Ken.
There's a complaint, yeah. You said what?
They're not writing letters anymore. They're ringing in.
So the very first place is to look at self. Who am I? What is coming up in me? Why is this coming up in me? What is it that this person has said or done that is causing this action or this reaction in me that is causing the disagreement? So looking at my own part in it first. And it may well be that I disagree with the way that you leave the tea bag in the cup when you make tea. You know, you don't leave the tea bag in the cup, or you put the milk in first, or you put the milk in, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Those low-level disagreements might be handled differently. But you're 100% right, Rory. As soon as that starts escalating into what we might consider a breach of ethics or not best practice that could bring harm to a client, that could bring harm to that person in the way that they're acting, that could bring disrepute on counselling as a profession, then we have that duty of candor to say something about that. And that might be confrontational. It might be viewed by that person as a disagreement. And I think you beautifully said, Rory, that you write it down first and maybe try to document the process that you're going through. And I'm going to go to the very pointy end of the stick. If you're finding that you cannot find resolution, and it is an important thing, it's not about the tea bag in the cup, it's an important thing where you really feel that harm can be caused by this, then you can seek mediation. We are putting this topic into student services, and a great place for mediation is going to your tutor. But I guess, Rory, sometimes a student may feel that the disagreement is with a tutor. What do you do then?
Well, it's a very, very tricky one, isn't it? I think that if you have a disagreement with the tutor, they're people, just people like us. They have a job title and they have some knowledge, and they have they hold a position of power, really, because they mark the assignments and they mark attendance and this type of thing. I would say very calmly, speak to the tutor and say, preferably at the end of when they're teaching, not at the beginning, because as a former lecturer, it can be very stressful, the beginning of the teaching day. So when you get an appropriate moment, and just say, look, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Is there any chance that I can book a tutorial? And touch, I would say, touch on the salient points. I feel what you've written in my assignment, I need to talk to you about that. Or there's something you said to me in class which I'd like to speak about. And then when you have the meeting, and enlarge on that more and see where you go. And what I would say is that, in terms of ethics is thrown around in our profession like a basketball. It's a basketball game. And the long and short of it is just because someone's done something different to the way you do it doesn't necessarily and automatically mean it's unethical. It just means they've handled a situation differently. So if you feel that, as Ken said, if it's something to do with your tutor, ask for some time, clearly articulate the issue. And, I don't think that you could successfully argue, well, it's the way you look at me. Because sometimes people don't realize how they look at people. I mean, I look at people. Someone might say, well, I don't like the way you looked at me. Well, I was just looking at you. There's no value behind it. I just happen to look at you. My face is my face, So be really clear on what it is and what remedy you want. Say, look, this, you said this, and this is where we're at, and this is the remedy I want. And then sit back and listen to what the other person has to say. I think that's a big part of mediating any kind of conflict. Speak your truth, and then let the other person speak their truth. And maybe when the other person speaks their truth, the kind of aspect that you're viewing your difficulty through may change.
Yeah, I like that.
So, yeah, because there's two sides to every story. And I think sometimes we need to just take a breath and a step back and just, it's easy to say calm down, and that's quite a patronizing thing to say, and I'm not saying that, but get a really clear understanding of what you want to articulate. And I think that's the way forward. And luckily enough, in terms of tutors and students, we were lucky enough to catch up with Sarah Henry, and she joins us now.
If you're studying counselling, the student library from Counselling Tutor is like having your own tutor alongside you. Every theory and skill in plain English, mapped to your specific course and level. Visit counsellingtutor.com, click on the products tab, and select Student Library for more information. That's counsellingtutor.com.
So, hello, Sarah, and how are you today?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm very well. And as you've heard Ken and myself discuss, sometimes in training groups there can be conflicts between students. And as we've said, one of the things is to develop a professional way of dealing with that and communicating. We communicate to clients. And also, that should be the same in a training group. I presume, Sarah.
I think not only does it need to be the same in the training group, but the training group is really the playground to practice how to manage these ruptures in relationships and difficult conversations. So when you're with a bunch of like-minded people and you have a shared mission and a shared commitment, the classroom needs to be the space where you are trialing what is ultimately going to be the main gig out with clients.
Yeah, the main gig. I like it. Yeah, it's true. And I know from my own experience as a student, going back a few years, there were people in my training group who I didn't gel with. Mm-hmm. None of their fault, none of my fault. You're not going to make friends with everybody you train. It's not like a loving. You're going to meet people who have different opinions and different views of the world, and they're going to see you in that same light sometimes.
That is inevitable. I think that the eclectic mix of people in a counselling training room can only really be compared to when you called it for jury duty, because there are so many different life experiences, characteristics, worldviews, and people come together in that space. And it's important to recognise that absolutely none of the training is about all becoming the best of friends.
Yes.
That isn't what it's about. Not with peers, but also not with clients. It's about being able to respect the separateness between you and I, and to be able to uphold whatever theoretical modality it is that you're aligned to, which ultimately gives the other person the right to be who they are, and for you in turn to be the right to have the right to be who you are. So not necessarily discrediting the care and friendship that may well occur, but friendship isn't the mission when it comes to training.
I think that's important. You might make friends and lifelong friends in training, but in my experience, I'm later on in years now, Sarah, and friends do come and go. There's a great quote from a film called Stand By Me, directed by Rob Reiner. Brilliant story of 4 lads in America who go out on a kind of an adventure, and he writes these adventures in a book. And his final part of the book, he says, you don't have any friends like you do when you're 12. People coming in and out of your life like busboys in a restaurant, waiters in a restaurant, and he was acknowledging that friendships can kind of have so much of a life. And I guess I was lucky, Sarah, in that when I trained, there wasn't any social media.
Lucky you.
Lucky me. There was no Facebooks. There was no WhatsApp. There was no TikToks. There was none of that. I think I was the only person with an email address and a mobile phone. And that was because the company I worked for, gave them to me. So anything that was said usually was resolved in the class, but that's not always the case, is it?
No, it's really not. And I think from the classroom experience that I have as a tutor, the one that I recall as a student myself, is that these other worlds, whether it is WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Facebook, text messages, these other worlds, what can happen in the counselling training classroom can permeate these other worlds and take on a life of their own. And so when it comes to disagreements or ruptures in the counselling classroom, I would always encourage clients to be to be very, very clear for themselves that the environment of the counselling training classroom is somewhat unique.
Yes.
And people in other realms weren't experiencing it not only from your perspective, but even as a shared environment. And so, yeah, sometimes those other digital spaces can be more of a hindrance than a help. And that will be for individual students to decide whether or not they want to participate in those spaces.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it echoes something that I've observed through the years, which is trust building. You know, when we first meet clients, they may not be fully trusting of us, you know, and that's not surprising given the kind of presentations that we sometimes engage with as therapists. And it might take a few sessions for people to build up trust. And I think the same thing is in training groups. People may see someone, they may say, they may have a strong reaction. You know, we talk about transference, counter-transference. You know, you recognise somebody, you think, oh, that reminds me of, you know, put a name, put a feeling to it. And before you know it, that person that you've never met before is the sum of all fears, or it could be my best friend. And I think it takes time for groups to build. I think tutors have a big part in that to lead the group experience, don't they?
To lead, to model.
Yes.
You know, that when we start to talk about the qualities of the therapeutic environment as tutors, modeling that also, because although, yes, tutors occupy a different position, we are still part of the group. We still have the capacity for conditions of worth to be activated in students, and vice versa. You know, we're still human. And so it is really, really important that, you know, when things like creating a group contract at the start of a course, that isn't just a paper exercise that is done because it's what you believe should be done, is that it's engaged with because those are the parameters that help build the trust in the group. And it's about understanding, you know, this is what my actual needs are, and going beyond the kind of top line, let's all respect each other, right? Well, what does that look like? What does that actually look like in a space that is by default challenging at the same time?
Absolutely. And I do think that the pressure of training is immense. It is, you know, certainly in PD groups, it can be a bit of a pressure cooker, can't it? Where people are learning to experience others, to vocalise their experience of others, to vocalise their own experience. And one of the things I learned, the best lesson I learned from PD groups, was that you don't know what's going on in other people's lives. You really, really don't. And someone who may not be engaging may be not present because they're worried about what's going on externally of the group. And it's okay saying we leave it all behind and we put it in our and we pick it up when we end the hour. The truth of the matter is, the truth of the matter is that if you've got a big issue going on at home and you're turning up, it may be that you cannot just disconnect from that.
Yeah, and that's on an individual basis. For me, it kind of feels 6.5 dozen, because there is a commitment to the individual who does have a lot of stuff going on. You know, is it right for you to be in the classroom if you're not able to meet the threshold of what's needed? And then similarly for peers, that kind of understanding of, it's not all about me. It's whatever's going on for them. I don't have to inject myself into that narrative by default. And I think it's in client-centered therapy. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, Rory. But a list of points that Carl Rogers put out, and one of them is about honouring the separateness. Between myself and the other person. And so, might we enmesh ourselves in somebody else's incongruence or upset because we can't actually allow them the separateness to be upset without tasking ourselves to remedy it?
Rescuing is what you're talking about.
And that in itself can cause friction between peers. It can cause ruptures. And so there's a really important personal ownership to take of what it is that's going on, and to avoid that kind of knee-jerk reaction to what somebody else might be offering. And of course, you know, all of this in the background of learning
the theory, learning to understand ourselves, getting our head around the coursework, the pressure of placements, supervision. For a lot of people now, the financial constraints and the domestic jiggery-pokery or the juddling that needs to go around, spinning plates, can lead to quite a lot of tension. If someone has got a bit of a problem with somebody, what would you say is the best way of resolving that?
I think, first and foremost, it depends on the nature of the problem. I think if the nature of the problem explicitly pertains to the classroom and how it is that you and your peers are working together as peers, that's quite a different problem to, this person rubs me up the wrong way. I don't necessarily believe in their worldviews. So I think the first step is actually to just spend some time, whether it's in your personal journal or personal therapy, just really trying to work out, is the problem something that actually pertains to how you connect with each other? Or is it just that this person isn't somebody that you choose to socialise with?
Yeah.
So that would be the first step. I think after that then is, and it's something that's much easier to say than to do sometimes, but to actually try and identify what the problem is.
Yeah.
What is the problem? Or is it, is it presented as something that is actually your own personal history that's manifested and has come to the fore in a distorted light? So yeah, try and work out, does it pertain to what we're doing here?
Yeah.
And then what is it that it attaches? What is it that it's activating within me? Thereafter, there are lots of ways in which, as candidates on counselling training courses, you can start to model that rupture and repair work that you've been writing criteria claims or essays about, when it comes to actually talking about it and connecting, not losing the connection and the relationship, but doing that vulnerability, offering that sincerity and integrity, especially from an ethical point of view. I want this relationship to continue, and I'm trying to work out the best way to do that with you.
Yeah. And I think it's an opportunity to actually demonstrate some of the insights one gets from training to be a therapist. And, one of the things that I always used to say to my students was, just ask the person, who am I to you? In other words, who do you remind me of? And that might start a process of introspection from the other person. And it might be, actually, you remind me of, list all the people that have upset me, betrayed me, hurt me. And I think that happens more than people say. I know my wife isn't a therapist, but she will often say to me, I think I've had some transference, Rory. And I go, so tell me, I'm like a supervisor, so tell me about this transference. And she'll say to me, well, I was thinking about something and I got angry, and then I realised that was something that happened in the past, and and I said, there you go. I said, so what do you do about it? I said, well, she said, well, I have to realise that this person isn't that person in the past, although I have to acknowledge at the same time those feelings that are the undertow. So maybe they should teach that at schools, transference.
Wouldn't that be great? That's the separateness. Is that we don't need to nullify anything in order to appreciate that there are multiple realities happening at once. The problem can be when one set of incongruence meets and rubs up another set of incongruence in totally the wrong way, is that it can actually be damaging, not just to those two people, but it can actually cause a rupture across a counselling training group. That can become then a really difficult legacy to move through. If you're doing a 2-year diploma, or if it's at the start of a 1-year program. So it's difficult. I hold my hands up, you'll do the same, is that we're not immune from this. I meet people in all walks of life and I think, what is it? What is it that means I'm just not warming to you? And I don't always know the answer, but what I strive to do is to take my place in that. this person is not universally problematic. There's something going on with me, and I can choose how I then want to engage with them. I'd say that's the growth that I identified in doing this training. Is there isn't always necessarily an answer. Sometimes it's just peace in the grey. And kind of getting on with things.
Absolutely. Maybe my final thoughts on this. Maybe we should, as tutors, we should teach transference and counter-transference at the beginning of counselling.
The induction.
Yeah.
It is. I do think as tutors, we can see it.
Yeah.
And especially, being on the receiving end of it in multiple ways, there is that modelling of, right, okay, I recognise that a student is being activated, and I am in turn going to strive not to be activated. But this is the work.
Yeah.
This is the work of being a therapist. It's not all sweetness and light. It's the difficult dynamics, it's the hard conversations, and it's the painful emotion. So, buckle in.
Yeah, and I think that probably brings us to the end of our conversation.
It does. And with that, it's back to you, Ken, in the studio.
Massive thank you to Sarah Henry, our roving reporter on that all-important topic, how counsellors handle disagreements with colleagues. Truth is, it's a skill. It's going to come throughout the arc of your counselling career. You're not going to go through agreeing with every colleague at every point and turn. We're going to face those disagreements. It's part of life, really. So great advice and well worth thinking about. And of course, this has been episode 375 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
And we started with ethical and sustainable practice, AI, confidentiality and data privacy in counselling. A lot of food for thought about how and what you need to do if you're storing client data in an external application. And just a gentle reminder that there is a super duper handout for that. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, click on episode 375, and that aid to memory that we talked about is waiting for you. You can just download it and keep it with your practice notes. We moved on to Practice Matters and an interview with Dara McLaughlin, the secrets of a successful website. The curtain was well and truly pulled back onto how websites work and what we need to think about when we're having a website designed. And then on to student services, how counsellors handle disagreements with colleagues, what we need to think about, how we need to consider what resolution looks like, and of course, a great contribution from Sarah Henry, who is our outside correspondent. Like to say thank you to everybody who likes, shares and subscribes. And always, and until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.